It didn't begin with a major decision. Nobody gathered in a meeting and said, let's lower the standard. It started small, a temporary walk-around, a delayed inspection, a shortcut taken during pressure, an exception made just this once. And because nothing bad happened, the organization moved on. The next time, the same compromise felt easier, then normal, then expected, until eventually people no longer recognized the drift at all, because the deviation had quietly become part of the culture. In the last episode, we explored the tension between work as imagined and work as done, and how workers gradually adapt when procedures no longer reflect operational reality. Today, we go a step further to explore what happens when those adaptations are repeated long enough that they stop feeling like temporary fixes and slowly begin to feel like the organization is drifting away from their own standards. Not suddenly, but gradually, one tolerated compromise at a time. This is the safety edge. Welcome back to the Safety Edge podcast, where safety leaders sharpen their edge. I'm Charles Edgar, your safety leadership coach. In this podcast, we explore the real dilemmas safety leaders face on site and in the workplace. Not textbook examples, not perfect scenarios, but the challenging, uncomfortable human moments when there is no obvious right answer and the pressure is real. And in each episode, we unpack one real-world leadership dilemma and explore how adopting a coaching mindset can make the difference. Not by controlling people, but by sharpening how we think, listen, and lead. Most organizations do not fail because people intentionally choose unsafe operations. In fact, many major incidents occur inside organizations filled with experienced people, good intentions, and strong operational knowledge. The problem is rarely a sudden collapse. It is usually a gradual drift. Standards slowly weaken, boundaries slowly shift, temporary exceptions slowly become accepted practice. And because operations continue functioning, the organization assumes the system remains healthy. This is what makes organizational drift dangerous. The system can appear successful while its defenses are quietly eroding underneath. And the difficult reality is this: people adapt faster than organizations realize. What once felt unacceptable can slowly begin to feel reasonable under pressure, especially when production continues, targets are achieved, and nothing visibly fails. That is how normalization begins, not through recklessness, but through repeated successful compromise. Picture this: a maintenance shutdown is running behind schedule. Pressure is building, delays are becoming expensive. Leadership wants recovery plans immediately. During one task, a verification step is shortened to save time. Not skipped completely, just compressed. The supervisor tells the crew, let's keep moving. We know this system well. The work finishes successfully. No incident occurs. And because nothing goes wrong, the exception feels justified. Weeks later, the same shortcut happens again. Then again during the next shutdown. New workers observe it. Supervisors stop challenging it. The workaround quietly becomes operational routine. Months later, leadership reviews the procedure and assumes this is how work is controlled. But in reality, the organization has already drifted away from its original standard. Not officially, but operationally. And as a safety leader, you can see the drift. You know something has changed. What started as a temporary exception has quietly become accepted practice. You want to call it out, but you're not sure how people will react. After all, the work was completed successfully. No incident occurred. No one was hurt. Production targets were achieved. You open your mouth, but the words don't come. Because now you're questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Am I creating a problem where none exists? If the work was completed safely, is this really worth raising? And suddenly you find yourself caught between what the organization accepts and what your professional judgment is telling you. You're not sure what to do. Now you are in a dilemma. Why is this a dilemma? This is a dilemma because organizational drift occurs when repeated compromises slowly reshape what the organization considers acceptable. And the dangerous part is this. Drift rarely feels dangerous while it's happening because every small adjustment appears reasonable on its own. We're only skipping one step. It's temporary. We've done this before. We know the risk. We'll fix it later. But over time, the organization unconsciously moves the boundary of acceptable risk. And eventually, people stop comparing operations to the original standard. They compare them to the most recent version of normal. That shift changes everything. Because once shift becomes normalized, the organization no longer sees weakening defenses as warning signs. It sees them as operational reality. Now let's explore why most leaders often miss this. Most leaders do not intentionally approve unsafe drift. The challenge is that organizational drift often hides inside operational success. Production continues, KPIs remain stable, deadlines are met, incidents remain low. So leadership assumes the system is working, the system is functioning. But success can create blindness, especially when workers are compensating quietly to keep operations stable. And the longer those compensations continue successfully, the more legitimate they begin to feel. Eventually, questioning them feels unnecessary or even inefficient. That is how drift becomes cultural. Not because standards disappear overnight, but because repeated compromise slowly redefines what people consider normal. Now let's explore what effective leaders do differently. Effective leaders actively look for drift before incidents expose it. They understand that organizational drift rarely announces itself through failure. It develops gradually, often hidden inside successful work, routine decisions, and accepted practices. Here's what they do differently. 1. They pay attention to temporary workarounds because repeated temporary fixes often signal permanent system weaknesses. Effective leaders understand that workarounds are valuable sources of information. They ask, why was the workaround needed in the first place? Rather than blaming people for adapting, they become curious about the conditions that made adaptation necessary. Because when temporary fixes become routine, the organization may be compensating for a problem that has never truly been resolved. 2. They study how work actually succeeds. Not just whether procedures exist on paper, they spend time understanding how work is really performed in the field. They recognize that procedures tell us how work is intended to happen, but frontline workers often reveal how work actually happens. By exploring the gap between expectation and reality, leaders gain valuable insight into hidden challenges, constraints, and adaptations that may otherwise remain invisible. 3. They make it safe to question normal practices because drift survives best in environments where people stop challenging routine deviations. Effective leaders create cultures where employees can respectfully ask, Why do we do it this way? When did this become acceptable? What risk might we be overlooking? They understand that the ability to challenge accepted practice is one of the strongest defenses against organizational drift. Because the moment people become afraid to question what is normal, drift begins to accelerate. 4. They look for small erosion in defenses, not catastrophic failures, but the small drift that initially appear harmless. They pay attention to delayed maintenance, bypassed checks, repeated exceptions, incomplete reviews, and recurring shortcuts. Individually, these issues may appear insignificant, but collectively, they can reveal weakening system defenses. Strong leaders understand that major incidents are often preceded by numerous small signals that were probably missed, tolerated, or simply accepted as normal. 5. They understand that success can mask risk because systems can continue producing successful outcomes while quietly becoming more vulnerable. They resist the temptation to assume that no incident automatically means no risk. Instead, they remain curious about how success is being achieved. They ask, what is keeping this system successful? Are people compensating for weaknesses we cannot see? What conditions are allowing us to succeed today? And could those conditions change tomorrow? Because they understand that organizations rarely drift into failure while failing. More often, they drift into failure while appearing successful. Strong safety leaders do not wait for incidents to reveal drift. They remain curious long before the consequences arrive, because they understand that by the time organizational drift becomes visible through failure, it may have already been present for years. Now let's take that mindset into the field and see it from a coaching lens. A major maintenance shutdown has just been completed successfully. The work was delivered on schedule. No incidents occurred. The team is feeling positive. As part of the post-job review, a safety leader joins the discussion to learn what went well and what could be improved. During the conversation, something interesting begins to emerge. The leader says, first of all, congratulations to everyone. The shutdown was completed safely and the team worked hard to recover the schedule. I'm curious, was there anything you had to do differently from the original plan to get the work completed? The supervisor responds,
nothing major, although we have been shortening the isolation verification process lately.
The leader responds, shortening it? Tell me more about it.
Not skipping it completely, just compressing parts of it. It started during the last turnaround, when we were behind schedule.
One operator responded,
at the time it made sense. Everybody understood the pressure we were under.
And what happened after the turnaround?
Honestly, we just kept doing it.
Most of the crew probably sees it as the normal process now.
That's interesting. If a new employee joined the team tomorrow, will they know the difference between the approved process and what is actually happening in the field?
Probably not. They would likely assume this is the approved way.
So what began as a temporary adjustment has become part of everyday work.
When you put it that way, yeah, I guess it has.
And has anyone formally reviewed or approved the change?
No, it just evolved over time.
Do you think anyone deliberately decided to lower the standard?
No, not at all. Everyone was trying to get the work done safely.
Nobody intended for it to become permanent.
Exactly. And that's what makes organizational drift so difficult to spot. It rarely starts with bad intentions. Most of the time, people are solving real operational challenges. The problem is that successful adaptations can quietly become accepted practice before anyone stops to examine them. Let me ask one final question. If this same adjustment had been proposed today as a permanent change to the procedure, would we have formally reviewed the risk?
Absolutely. We would have had to.
Then perhaps that's our signal. Not that people did something wrong, but that something important has changed and the system hasn't caught up yet.
I never thought about it that way.
Neither did I. It just slowly became normal.
And that's the lesson. Organizational drift rarely occurs through one major unsafe decision. It develops through small acceptable compromises that quietly stop feeling temporary. Now let's stop there for a moment. Notice what happened in that conversation. Nobody intended to lower the standard. Nobody made a deliberate decision to increase risk. Yet over time, a temporary adjustment quietly became accepted practice. And that's where the lesson begins. Now let's go over the coaching insight from this conversation. The role of an effective leader is not simply to enforce standards. It is to remain curious about how standards evolve in practice. Because organizational drift often hides inside successful work. The work gets done, targets are achieved, no incident occurs, and slowly, the organization stops noticing what has changed. That is why leaders must create space for conversations that surface hidden adaptations before they become embedded into the culture. Because once a deviation becomes normal, it is no longer viewed as a deviation. It becomes the way we do things around here. Now let's go over the key takeaways from this episode. Organizational drift is rarely sudden. It develops gradually through repeated compromises, operational pressure, and normalized exceptions. The absence of incidents does not always mean the system is strong. Sometimes it simply means the system has not yet been tested by the conditions capable of exposing its weaknesses. That is why effective leaders should pay attention to the small signals, the workaround that never got removed, the exception that became routine, the control that slowly lost its rigor, the question that stops being asked. Because major incidents are rarely the result of a single decision, more often, they are the result of many small shifts that accumulate over time. Shifts that appear reasonable in isolation, but dangerous in combination. Strong leaders understand that standards do not erode overnight. They erode gradually when deviations become accepted and accepted practices become culture. And in that moment, when leaders stop asking, who made the mistake, and start asking, what have we slowly come to accept? That is where organization learning begins. That learning, that awareness, that reflection, that is the edge. This week, ask your teams, what temporary workarounds have quietly become permanent? What compromises no longer get questioned? And where might operational pressure be slowly reshaping our standards? Because organizational drift rarely appears dramatic from the inside. It develops slowly through repeated successful compromise. And by the time the drift becomes visible, the culture may have already adapted around it. If this episode resonated with you, share it with your team, because sometimes the conversations that prevent the next incident begin by questioning what the organization has quietly accepted as normal. While here, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to invite a friend or colleague to listen along with you. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Safety Edge podcast. I'm Charles Edgar, your safety leadership coach. And until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep sharpening your edge. Bye for now.
Brought to you by the Safety Edge platform, an independent leadership and safety learning platform, building leadership capacity, one conversation at a time. Find us wherever you get your podcasts